Welcome everyone. My name's Jennifer Walinga and I'm a professor of communication and culture at Royal Roads University. Welcome to our webinar series, Sport, Leadership and Social Change. We are excited to be hosting episode 18, Building Quality Sport in Canada. And we have exciting panelists joining us for I think a very interesting and positive and hopeful conversation today. I'm really looking forward to it. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm operating on the land of the Lekwungen and Kusepsin people, also known as the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. We partner with our nations at Royal Roads and take very seriously our responsibility for truth and reconciliation, acknowledging the harms of the past and the gaps in our history, and doing our best to work toward better understanding, better interweaving ways of being and doing that our Indigenous partners offer us. We're very grateful to be teaching, learning, living, working, and playing on the lands of our ancestors. I also spend a lot of time going backwards in a skinny boat on the Wasanich territory. And I always like to highlight the fact that we have so much to learn from sport. So in my teaching, leadership through sport and in sport, and through my teaching of communication and culture with organizations and my own students at Royal Roads, I always emphasize that we can learn from our context, from our craft. And that, of course, for me includes sport. That little boat teaches me something every day, including today. We also honor the land that we operate on it. Our campus is an amazing place, and we're very lucky to be teaching and learning there. And it is an essential component of our teaching and learning and research model. The systems, the ecosystems, the beauty of nature has so much to teach us. And we spend a lot of time out in our campus. The 300 hectares of old growth forest. We've got the Olympic Mountains across the Esquimalt Lagoon. And of course, all those gardens and wonderful places to learn and reflect. I love highlighting this picture in particular. It's a garden on the campus, but we use this bridge to highlight the importance of communication in all that we do. And these essential elements of communication include diversity, understanding the gaps between us before we try to bridge those gaps, whether it's through a conversation, a handshake, or a structure of some sort. It's important to acknowledge our differences to begin with. I also love that image because of the reflective quality, another essential component of what we teach and learn at Royal Roads. This webinar is really about the power of sport, the power through sport, the power within sport to teach the world all sorts of fabulous principles. And I'm so proud of our athletes and coaches, sport participants of all kinds, really, in their efforts to use the platform of sport, their platforms within sport, to speak on social issues, the need for change, and to really call for positive change in all aspects. And at Royal Roads, I think it's a perfect little environment for us to be hosting this webinar, because we too are very interdisciplinary and we try to come at issues from multiple perspectives. So sport is a wonderful opportunity to apply that interdisciplinary way of thinking and doing. We have schools of development, diversity and inclusion, education, environment, equity and human rights, health, media and communication, and peace. And we also highlight, as part of our model, the importance of acknowledging the learning that happens outside of academia. that people are bringing learning from their context, so sport included, but their professional context, their community context. We're always learning, and we have a responsibility to bring that learning into our learning community at our school as well. We partner with many organizations, of course, to offer learning opportunities for people, but sport is one of them. So we work with Game Plan to support athletes, elite athletes who are coming to complete their education. We are developing programming in the area of sport leadership as well. And another little partnership I like to highlight is with CFL. We just ran a course in leadership through sport with a number of football players as well. It's great to see. And so that leads us to our episode, Building Quality Sport in Canada. What's working and what are we still working toward in sport in Canada? I want to remind you to pose your questions in the chat anytime. We'll be monitoring the chat as we go, and I'll try to interweave your questions, your comments, whatever you want to share. And there may be space at the end of the webinar as well to invite your voices into the conversation. And now I'd like to introduce our panel. We have a fabulous group of people. So Dorothy Paul, I'm not sure if she's able to join us today, but if not, I'll conduct a one-on-one with her. Dorothy is a learning facilitator in the Indigenous long-term participant development pathway and works with Sport for Life Society, as well as many other. All of our panelists have multiple hats, multiple roles they play in the world of sport, but I just give this brief intro to begin with, and then we give everyone a chance to tell us a little bit more about themselves and their pathway into and through sport. Tracy Blake is a leadership and mentorship theme lead and with Sports Scientists Canada and works with various sports across Canada. Isabel Kaye, I've had Isabel on the webinar before. We did an interview on coaching and coach development. And I wanted to bring Isabel in as a representative of Coaching Association of Canada as Director of Coach Development, because all of these people have different perspectives to share and initiatives to share on what different organizations are working on to improve the quality of sport in Canada. And of course, we have Andy Van Nunegem, who's Director of Research and Innovation with On the Podium. And it's wonderful to bring all of these fabulous people together into a room and also link them all up. Some know each other better than others, so it's always a great opportunity to build partnerships and relationships this way as well. That's what I love about communication forums. And so let's get started. I have some contact information as well, but I wanted to also highlight that you'll receive the recording and you are free to share that with whomever you like. Anyone who registered, and we had over 100 registrants this time, will receive the recording automatically. So you can always come back and listen in if there are elements that you love. But also, I'm sure people will be sharing. They'll be sharing initiatives and projects that they're working on, and we will link to that on our website. So the recording is posted there, and we also have links to different things that are mentioned throughout the webinar episode. So you can come back to that and have a look there. And Tracy, you want to kick off? Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to highlight quickly, just because it's for my regulatory body, I'm a PT, as I'm a physiotherapist, not an RT.
Oh,
just so that's clear, just from a designation perspective off the jump, but I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. I'll correct that and I'll make sure it's corrected on the website as well. Cool. I often just copy and paste from wherever. Who knows where I get things sometimes. Wonderful to see everybody, and welcome to all the participants, highlighting again that you can post your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll try to work those into the conversation. You can change your view so that you focus in on the speakers if you like, and welcome everybody. And let's get started. So the first question I had for everybody, and I've had conversations with all of you in different settings, but I want to kick off by first just welcoming you to share a little bit more about your path into sport. Why is sport so important to you? Why do you continue to really devote a lot of your life to sport? And whoever would like to begin, go ahead, Isabel, you've got your mic on, and then we'll go around the circle. And there's Dorothy. Welcome, Dorothy. Good to see you. Glad we found you. Great.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Isabel Kaye. I'm a Director of Sport Safety at the Coaching Association of Canada. And I've been involved in sport for over 40 years, longer than that actually. But and the reason I'm involved in sport is because I have continuously had positive experiences in sport. So started at the age of 6 years old. My mom took me skating and I was falling all over the place, but I was absolutely loving it. So she immediately put me in skating lessons, and I've continued to be involved in figure skating for the rest of my life. So in various roles. So I was an athlete, as a coach. I worked at Skate Canada, so the national body for figure skating, for about 12 years. And now I'm a volunteer on a club board. So it's just something that has given me so much in my life. And so I'm always willing to give back to that sport, but also to other sports that I also participate in. And I think part of that started with the fact that I had the most amazing phys ed teacher when I was in elementary school. And in those days, our programs were segregated. There was gender segregation of programming, and people can argue for or against that. But for me, it was a wonderful experience. And she absolutely loves sport, and she introduced us to all kinds of things, non-traditional things. We used to do square dancing and orienteering and all kinds of stuff back in those days. And she just took her lunchtime and just had us involved in all kinds of sports. So she essentially created a generation of physically literate individuals. And I grew up in Labrador City, which was a winter wonderland. And so I was involved in winter sports all the time. That was our social time. We would do cross-country skiing. We had beautiful trails, downhill skiing, snowmobiling, all kinds of things. So it was just a wonderful sort of childhood and upbringing in my community. And community is also a big part of sport, which was embedded in my lifestyle growing up. So our communities would get together and do the participation walks as a town, like the whole town would show up and we'd walk. So it was just a big part of my entire upbringing, and it's just carry through. And so that's why I really believe in sport. I believe in the power of sport for connection. It's really about connection. That's why people come together. There's so much data that shows that even new citizens in Canada really find connections through sport and through people, and learn about the culture of Canada. And so, there's just so many positive things that right now are not really showcased as much, just given our sort of environment. But, try to find ways to get back to those positive stories and the people that are so passionate about sport, and make it really really great experience for, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, wherever you live. And I was just at the Canada Games. I just returned today, and it's just another example of, the community coming together. There's tons of volunteers. Everyone's happy, having a good experience. And we're seeing some really, really nice, sporting events, athletes coming together and having a great time. And those types of events are where you really are grounded in, this is why we're doing this. And it doesn't have to be competitive sport. It's just anything. People will come together and support their communities when there's these great events happening for youth in Canada.
So beautiful. And you really highlight through the games, right? There are so many ways to participate in sport. You don't have to be an athlete or a coach. There are all sorts of ways to contribute. I love that about that connection. Thank you for that beautiful overview and highlighting, giving shout outs to Labrador and cultural aspects and your PE teachers, right? And this is what I was really hoping for from this episode, is to keep in view, right? All the good, all that we're working for and toward, and what is working, so that balance is, of course, we're always trying to improve things because we're sport people, right? Wonderful. And Andy, why don't you go next?
Well, excuse me. Thank you, Isabel. You set me up beautifully, because one of the most powerful people in my life that showed me the power of sport was a phys ed teacher as well. And it inspired me to become a phys ed teacher for a good 10 years of my life. And but now, obviously, I'm Vice President of Performance Sciences, Research and Innovation. I own the podium. But I never forget my roots. And I never forget the power of being in the lives of young people, being a teacher. They teach us as much as we teach them. And And I remember that passionately, and it's that passion that brings me back to work every day. My past obviously is littered with both recreational participation, equally with high performance sport. Much of my comments today will come from my role with On the Podium through the lens of high performance sport. But again, certainly I do remember my start and my roots as a young child playing ice hockey. I lived in the UK, so looking at the systems of UK sport, both as a phys ed teacher in the UK, but equally here in Canada, was very powerful. Probably the other most impactful moments of my life come through being the high performance director for Wheelchair Rugby Canada, attending several games with them, equally with the pair ice hockey team with Hockey Canada as well. So again, like many of the participants in this panel, just an eclectic set of experiences that shape who we are and how we wish to present ourselves to the rest of the community. I'm looking forward to today.
Thanks so much, Andy. Great. And how about Tracy? You ready to go? And then Dorothy?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
So hi, my name's Tracy. My pronouns are she, her. I'm coming today from the land of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, which was originally the land of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, many nations, and were invited both in other tribes and other people to occupy this land and visit this land in the spirit of respect and communication and community. And I think those tones are probably going to come through over and over again. The neighborhood I grew up in what is actually now known as Toronto, is North Etobicoke, which is Rexdale. It is a very multi-ethnic, highly multiracial, lower income. Well, I guess nothing in Toronto really counts as lower income anymore, but as I was growing up, that's what it was. That was what it was for us, right? This is before the internet. I'm old enough to remember a time before we all had computers in our pockets. And that's how we communicated, right? Like the way I knew what was happening in the world was the way that the demographic and the makeup of my school changed year on year, right? And so you had people coming in who, my own parents are double immigrants, my grandparents were immigrants as well. And I think that the idea of connecting across generations in a new place where no one is really born in the same place, across languages, across cultures, sport was the vehicle that we used to do that, right? And so that for me was how it started. I used to literally tell time. I didn't know when the seasons began and ended, but I knew what spring training meant, and I knew, what the fall classic meant, and so those were the ways in which I marked time growing up as a child. And once I got to an age where I realized that perhaps being an athlete was not going to be the thing, which some would argue was years too late, looking for other ways and having my imagination sparked by the other ways in which you could participate and contribute to sport and through sport has been the thing that has sort of through my adult life been what has pushed me through. And I know the job that was listed there, that the title that was listed was through Sports Scientist Canada, but my sort of the heart of my work and where I come to all of my work from is as a physio. I've been a physiotherapist since 2004. I'm on my third go around actually right now with Canada Basketball with the Women's National Team program. I've worked with Volleyball Canada and the Canadian Sport Institute, Ontario. And for me, I guess when I think about high school and I think about, again, the people talked about physical education, but I also think about the darker sides of sport. I also think about the ways in which sport was leveraged and weaponized even then. I think about the ways in which when I say we, I mean my cohort, my classmates, my community has had sports dangled and then taken away at things that were not outside of their control, like that had nothing to do with what was happening on the field of play. And so I think that it's important to recognize that sport is an activity and its power and the potential of it is one thing. And then sport as an institution or organizations or sector or structure or something else again, and that they're not always exactly the same. And the hope, and what I hope we get to talk about today, is how those things can be harmonized to move towards what we believe and what we see in the activity of sport, move towards that being consistently reflected in all levels of sport.
Actually learn from sport, hey, embody the principles of sport and how we do it. Love that. Thank you very much. And love that little trip down memory lane of grade school and high school and this lack of seasons, but the seasons. And Dorothy, please share what has drawn you to sport? What's been your pathway? Why do you continue to devote your life to sport in so many ways?
Hey everyone, my name is Dorothy Paul. My mom was from Old Masset on Haida Gwaii. My dad's from the Outer Hebrides. And when my mom passed away when I was 3, my dad married Gloria Willie from Muskamatsawa territory. And I'm currently living with my husband in Sartlip First Nation, the English name. For me, I came to sport late. I'm the oldest girl of a family of 7. The oldest was a boy, so I'm considered the oldest in the way things work. So we didn't play a lot of sports growing up. We didn't have the resources for all of us to participate in sports. So played a little ball probably when I was 11 or 12, but I really didn't start participating in sport until probably about middle school. And really what prompted that was the 76 Olympics. It was on TV. We never got to watch TV growing up, but the Olympics were on. So we all sat and watched that. And then we all played together. So that summer we set up obstacle courses around the house and we did laps jumping over these obstacle courses and over the septic tank and everything. And we did that all summer. So by the time I went to middle school, I joined the cross country team. So that was my first introduction to the sport. But since then, really it was high school that really solidified that for me. I tried basketball. I played one game of basketball, but because I didn't play it in middle school, trying to jump in at the high school level was a bit of a shocker. So I played one game. But for me, it was mostly soccer, field hockey, and track in high school. So I was fortunate to have probably 3 high school teachers who saw that I had a drive to actually be good at everything that I wanted to do. So they helped me with that. And even at the point where I'm the oldest of 7, we weren't really structured at that point. So what I really credit a couple of my high school teachers for is for me, sport has always been around, I have all these emotions. Most people don't see them, but my emotions are huge. And sport is a way for me to blow off some of those emotions. So I was really fortunate in high school to have a couple of teachers who allowed me just to get up and walk out and go for a run. So that really started me off. And then I started playing league soccer first. So I'm kind of backwards from most of my teammates. I started playing league soccer first, and then my uncle saw me playing in a tournament, and he's like, "Oh, why don't you come over to the quote unquote Indian ball?" Right? And I was like, "Oh, what is that?" Right? So I was fortunate enough to play probably 25 years, maybe 30 years in I'll use a politically correct term because we don't call it that, but the Indigenous soccer tournament system here in BC. Played most of my soccer at the premier level until I got too old. So I'm one of those who aged out, not because of skill level, but because they expected premier players to be like 18 to 23 or something, right? And I was 44, I think, by the time I quit premier. So I tried to play over 35s and I couldn't because I was too competitive and it was just not good for my teammates. So I picked up field lacrosse, but after 30 plus years of playing soccer, in women's field, the ref blows the whistle, you have to come to immediate stop. And I couldn't. I'd wander all over the field, and I kept getting penalties because I kept wandering all over the field. I was like, okay, I can't do this sport. So I started box lacrosse, a box lacrosse team. Been playing box lacrosse for the last 15, 16 years. But really, sport for me started off as a way to kind of release a lot of tension and a lot of emotions that were coming up for me. My path in mainstream sport, probably not the same as anybody else, where I learned very quickly the social aspect is not going to be a part of the reason why I was playing sports. I'm Indigenous. It came with its own host of things that happened and teammates saying things. So I learned quite early that sport for me was about being the best that I could be, training so that I could do anything that came across my desk, and then being able to have the confidence to try anything. Because I've been training and doing sports for so long, I can go and do like a gigantic swing and not worry about whether or not like my body can handle it, right? So for me, sports had a lot to do with testing my limits, seeing how I could, even though I'm part of a team, how can I elevate my play and indirectly elevate the players around me. So that was kind of how I contributed to teams. So it was kind of weird. It's just the last couple of years that I've realized I've played team sports my whole life as an individual. And so why didn't I pick an individual sport, right? So that kind of has been going through my head. You know, you get older, you start thinking about things. The other thing, one of the reasons why I played soccer for so long is in our Indigenous communities, we've actually brought the sport of soccer into our culture, not the other way around, right? So soccer is embedded in our culture on the West Coast here. So we've taken it, and it's how we play it is really different than how mainstream plays soccer. It's really intense. There's no set plays and things like that, right? It's not structured, right? It's very creative. So that allowed, since I'm highly creative outside of sports, it also allowed me to explore that side of myself too before I even started becoming creative outside of sports. Which led me to coaching, because I saw there was a need for coaches. And then I realized there's only one of me. How can I transfer what I have in my head to more than just the athletes in front of me? So then that's how I got into facilitating. I got into coaching by accident. I had one of my former coaches say, hey, come to this thing. So I was there for 2.5 days. And then I'm like, what is this? And he's like, oh, it's a coaching course. That's how I started coaching. Facilitating was kind of almost the same thing, but I realized that's where my strength is really around helping people understand that as coaches, we're growing human beings, we're helping to grow human beings, and we're using coaching and sports to do that, because it's not just about the technical and tactical aspects of it. It's really broadening and pushing people's minds to think about their morals, their ethics, and what are you going to do in this situation, right? So that took a long time. Sorry.
That's great.
I wasn't expecting to say all that. But yeah, that's part of the reason why I'm continuing to be in sports as well.
Thank you, Dorothy. No, we're really hearing from all of you, you know, the pathway that led you and the experiences that enriched your commitment to sport, your understanding of sport, and let's keep going. So this episode, it's really about thinking about we're confronting a lot of discourse around sport right now in Canada. It's probably highlighted for us because we're so connected to sport and we care so deeply about it. So I'm sure, you know, we're in a bit of an echo chamber. and maybe the rest of the world isn't hearing it quite as loudly as we all are. But I am definitely, and I know we all are, hearing a loud discourse about what's wrong in sport in Canada right now. Some of the major challenges that we're facing are emerging and continue to emerge. I feel like every week there's another story that is of concern. So definitely sport is always evolving, and we're currently experiencing a lot of grief, a lot of antagonism, conflict. And it's clear what we don't want from sport, but what are your reactions to these calls for change? How are you feeling? What's your response been personally? Tracy, you want to start?
Honestly, I think it's about time. I've been a little bit of the finally. I think there's a couple of things about this that make me feel that way. One is that when as a, again, it's the difference between sport as an activity and as a game, and sport as a structure institution. And so I'm very clear on like what we're talking about as the difference, right? I don't necessarily see these things as an attack on sport, the game or the activity. I see these things as a reckoning of institutions. And so for me, that it's easy for me to keep them separate in my head, the joy that sport gives me and the institutions that need to be rectified in order for that access and opportunity to that joy to be for everybody. I think when I think about, as you said, there's a lot now and more coming. I think it's an effect that we see that's caused by a lack of ability to report before, a lack of action on reporting that does happen. When you don't have, when you feel like you're not being heard, you just get louder and louder and louder. And all of a sudden, the ability to be heard happens, but you're still screaming. And so that's, I think, what it feels like for a lot of people, is that like everybody's screaming right now, but people have been like, we've been saying this in a like proper tone for years, and like screaming was the only way you heard us. So now we're just going to keep going, right? And I think eventually it will even out. I think eventually we'll get to the point where people don't feel like they need to be scream to be heard. I feel like we're going to get to a point where hopefully where there will be less people who have something to scream about. But I think what we're seeing right now relates to the backlog and to, it's a reflection of how systems have worked up until this point, rather than a reflection of the value that sport itself brings going forward. So I think part of it is that people need that opportunity. They need the opportunity to get what has to happen off their chest, and they have the vehicles now. And so let her run.
Mm-hmm. The truth part, hey, first.
Truth first.
Yeah. And acknowledging what has occurred, and allowing a bit of screaming for now until we can kind of get to a place where we can start to actually solve problems. Yeah, thank you. And Dorothy, do you have comments on that? What has been your response to the heightened discourse around what we don't want in sport?
First, this is my grandson. He pops in and out. Tracy, I'm with you. People are starting to hear it now. For as long as I've been in sport, I've seen stuff bubbling to the surface, and reports happen, and then you don't hear anything from them again, right? So I know in my sphere, we've done a lot of bubbling stuff to the surface. And like Tracy, it is a systems thing. The system is, the sport system in Canada is changing. And it's just part of the evolution of the change, where people are not accepting the status quo anymore and are now more willing to hear for understanding, as opposed to, okay, yeah, I don't know what to do with that. So people now have more tools to kind of go, oh, we can actually do something about this now, as opposed to 10, 15 years ago, it was like, we have no idea what to do with this at this point, right? But we now have more structures in place to deal with things as they bubble up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it feels like the people are being heard is part of the evolution of communication as well, right? We have more avenues, channels, platforms with which to speak from, and greater access to other to ears, right? To people who are listening
Well,
and able to.
for me, it's more, there's a difference between listened to and being heard. People are being listened to now, which is really different than being heard, right? I've heard the stories forever, but people are actually really listening to figure out how to respond now and to take action, which I think is a key thing for me.
It's funny you say that, Dorothy, because I think like there's this mismatch, right? Between, if you think, like, I think all of us come from or have participated at some point in team sports. And if you think about how communication is cultivated in team sports and how, you know, how it's thought of with respect to, you know, facilitating success, right? At an activity level. And then you think about what's happening at an institution level, even if you even take out COVID, even take out like some of the stories we're hearing about abuses of power, just generally, they don't always actually match up, right? And I think what's happening is that stories about the fallout from that mismatch, stories about the impact and implications of letting that mismatch ride for long periods of time, that's what we're hearing a lot of. And you mentioned the sort of evolution of sport happening. The evolution of the athlete is also happening, and they're not necessarily evolving at the same rate or on the same trajectory. So every once in a while, they're both changing, but all of a sudden that gap widens, or all of a sudden, you know. And so I think we're getting what we're in the thick of right now is, as those power dynamics changes, now you can hear both sides of what's happening, right? And so you're getting all of the voices because the power has changed, that everybody has, or more people have an opportunity to have their voices heard and listened to, as Dorothy said. And so all of a sudden, it's not just one side that we're hearing and how they're evolving and changing, it's both sides expressing, and it sounds louder than we're used to, but I think it's all voices and perspectives that are required if what we want to do is harmonize that. Can you tell? I was a musician before I was anything else, so there's going to be all of the music metaphors in here at some point. Sorry.
Love it. And Andy, your responses, you know, I think on the podiums had their feet held to the fire, but this is not new, right? This is not a new, these are not new complaints. We've been hearing stories for a long time, as both Tracy and Dorothy have alluded to, but, and what's been your response in the role? I know you're doing so much around leadership development across the sports system, so.
Yeah, and thank you for those previous comments. I think I want to stay quiet and let Tracy talk the entire 90 minutes so I can listen to her. But there are brilliant comments, and when I'm taking some quick notes, what I've heard so far and I resonate with is, I mean, I've heard the word evolution, I've heard the word change, and even in your question, you use the word evolution, and there's system evolution, behavior change that needs to happen, and a lot of people are screaming. Some of that's built up screaming over time, and there's a mismatch. I think we can start bringing in words like the values. People are starting to scream about the deviation or mismatch between the values that we hold as Canadians, we hold as individuals, and perhaps a deviation in certain situations that we see in the news where the values are not being upheld and what we would consider the way we want to value sport. For me, in high performance sport, and I warned everyone I would bring my comments as somebody who works for On the Podium with high performance sport as our focus, as our technical mandate from the federal government. So we will always go back to the starting conversation from a values perspective. Are we encouraging, are we asking NSOs to engage in developing environments and where there's psychological, physical safety and health for the athletes first and foremost? If we can start from that position, then I think we'll be in a better place to bring in the change in a rate that's needed and bring in the appropriate change as well in whatever context may be, whether it be participation, high performance. I think we have to understand that, and I'm going to go back to this paradigm constantly in this particular webinar here. I think there are two dimensions we need to pay attention to. There's people and there's performance, and they are compatible, and we need to look after people, and in certain contexts we need to look after performance. And it's okay to want to perform. I think performance is absolutely fine. Sport in of itself allows you to express excellence. And we shouldn't lose that focus on sport. Sport can also be used for the power of change, as we've been referring to now. But let's be very clear, sport also allows individuals or teams to express excellence, and whatever that means. And let's be very clear, I didn't say winning medals, I said achieving excellence. And so I think that comes to an agreement as to what does excellence mean to you, and what's the why for you in sport. And I think that's whether it's participation or high performance, those are the starting points of a conversation. And I think everything else will fall into place thereafter. But so again, that's my initial response.
Thank you. And Isabel, how about you from a coach development perspective? What's your response to all that's going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think for any sort of cultural change to occur, this is really needed. And, it creates that sense of urgency and a need to respond. So I think we're in this kind of a messy middle right now. Like things will probably get worse before they get better. But I also am always hopeful because it's creating an opportunity for some difficult conversations and some really important conversations. And I think that, prevention and education are the ways that we respond predominantly. So we do that through our partnership with our national sport organizations, and we do it with our provincial and territorial partners as well. And so it's a combination of providing opportunities for them to engage and look at their programming, and for us as a collective to, to do a combination of just in time, needs around education, as well as sort of this looking at the system and how we can collectively make it better. And that includes our partnership with Own the Podium and Canadian Olympic Committee and Paralympic Committee as well. And even in through like even responsible coaching movement, which is predominantly club based, like all of our national sports have almost all have signed on, but it's really there's a lot of traction at the club level where we have hundreds and hundreds of clubs. So there's work being done. I think, right now, people are like, people respond the way they're going to respond based on, whatever their lived experiences are. And I think that's just normal. And, there's so many different conversations that I'm sure all of you have heard of, like things like, well, safe sport is just the checklist, but we need it. Like we need the checklist. We need people to get lined up with policies, and having the policies helps people navigate what they can do and, how they can report something if they need to, or understand what the process is. And so, we need that. We need enforcement of those policies. But at the end of the day, once we get out of the messy middle, what's really important, and Andy spoke to that a little bit, is that we need to empower people to speak up when they see something, like when they're in the middle of something that is not okay, they need to speak up. And that's what I'm noticing in safe sport, is that people, things were normalized in sport. We can agree that, there was this cultural conditioning, in some cases, this is just the way it is, things like that. But that has definitely evolved. And I think we're already more educated than we were, even a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And, there's a lot of historical things that are coming to the surface now. But I think that, the emotional intelligence piece is critical. Psychological safety is going to be a major component of what I think sport programs will look like. Coaches and athletes co-creating their programming. And, a lot of our coach education is geared to community coaches, but even in a high performance context, safe sport and high performance can coexist. And I think that it would be back to just really understanding, how people are feeling, what they really, what their goals are, and that you can co-create those and have expectations and understandings around what that is going to look like. And that's not just high performance, that's at any level. But, people, you know, they come into sport for various reasons. And I think that the big part of the education is that we really get grounded in, you know, even what Sport for Life will, you know, the good people, the good places and good programs, and really sort of focus in on that, and people having fun and getting what they want out of sport.
In a way that really reflects those values that sport teaches us, really, or that we can garner from sport. I often use the
Absolutely.
phrase in and through. So we can look at sport and how we're doing sport within sport and our institutions, et cetera. But sport is also that vehicle. And it strikes me listening to all of you too, just how reflective our experience in sport lately and the discourse around the challenges we're facing in sport, abuse and violence, that it's really reflecting a crisis, a social tipping point too, right? I mean, it's not just in sport, it's everywhere. Yet, wow, sport is such a great vehicle for examining these issues and rectifying where we're misaligned. Beautiful to see. So let's talk a little bit more about what do you think some of the key issues are? I'm hearing, you know, the importance of listening, the importance of co-creation, the importance of values, the importance of balancing and not forgetting. It's also about expressing excellence. We heard that really strongly from Dorothy, right? When she described her experience trying to play field lacrosse. No way, I need to be in the box with a stick that, you know, where I can be intense and battling. There's nothing wrong with that. We love that about sport. The importance of empowerment and what else? What are the issues you're focusing on from your perspective that you think are actual crucial levers for change here?
I can go. I think we talked about them sort of, but I want to say them explicitly, is transparency and accountability. These are things that we expect when within the lines, right? When we talk about within the field of play, we talk about these things all the time. How we translate them, where we translate them, who is responsible for holding those things true and prioritizing them changes outside the lines. And so that brought me to my third idea, which is around consistency, right? And taking these values that we have in sport, not assuming that they're a checklist. When I say that, not the, to Isabel's point about a checklist, but the idea, it's not like just a present absent, right, of these values. It's how are they applied consistently? If they're applied consistently, how are they prioritized? And does that prioritization reflect a consistency in practice? And then this is, I don't really know what to call this, to be honest. I use the term cultural fluency, but I'm sure you'll correct me if it's incorrect. But I had a conversation, I was having a conversation with someone in leadership who has long been in leadership in sport. And I was talking about sort of how I've come to this work because for them, it was incongruent that me as a healthcare provider was interested in system and structure and operations as it relates to this work. And so I was trying to explain where my journey had come from and my path. And I was talking with respect to sort of health and humanity and its role in sport. And the response I got was related to resources. And so it was like we were having a conversation about the same thing in two different languages, so it never quite matched up. And so having the capacity to understand sort of, when I talk to other physios, I say like, we're trained and educated in healthcare, in the healthcare sector. But when you work particularly in high performance sport and up, high performance pro sport, you're working in the sports sector. It's not about you, and it will never be again. And so it is about your ability to learn the language of the culture that you're entering, not just the context of the culture that you're entering, in order for you to contribute in a way that makes sense and is sustainable. And I think that, so cultural fluency is the only term that I have for it, but that idea of how that shows up for all the different disciplines, organizations, sections, and then the consistency across that fluency, I think is another important component.
And yeah, and are we clear on our cultural values in sport? You know, you talk about, we know in sport, when we play sport, we are transparent, we're accountable, we're consistent, you have to be. And yet when we are in our sport institutions, systems, organizations, somehow that doesn't always, we don't always make the link of the leap. Yeah, so tough to be I think part of this change is us really grappling with, what are the values we're trying to be fluent in within the sports sector. Other comments? What are the key issues? What are the levers for change? What are you honing in on or focusing in on? You feel free to expand on some of the things you've already highlighted, like co-creation or whatever you're honing in on. I know, Andy, yeah, go for it. You're working on this.
I could see your eyes looking at me. See your eyes, Jennifer, and I'll pick up again on Tracy's points, because I'll make a statement that everybody has heard this before. It's colloquialism. Culture eats everything for lunch. And since we've started to use the word culture here, I think this is quite topical. And with social media, with everything else, with the ability to communicate quickly, efficiently, effectively, sometimes negatively, positively, culture change is coming at a pace that we've never seen before, being demanded at a pace we've never seen before. And I think that's a challenge. That's a challenge for us to keep up with system change to match that type of demand. I also think, and again, Jennifer, you'll know this, people who are old enough like myself remember things like Anderson and Enron. When they collapsed as businesses, it taught how we teach our business leaders through MBA courses, and how we went back to more an ethical approach to the education of our future business leaders. And I make that parallel example. I think we're in a similar situation where we have to understand that culture is driven by cultural ethics, leadership, values. We need to understand all of those, and they take time. They take time to unpack at an organizational level, at a systems level, and how do we reorientate ourselves given all of the different dynamics in this world. COVID coming in is an external influence that is shaping people's ways in which they want to be seen or the other people see themselves. So I think we're in this incredibly dynamic world right now, and it is messy. And I agree with Isabel, this is an incredibly messy time period with important conversation. I actually think it's positive. This messiness is positive, because out of this, we are embracing, and I learned this from Dr. Adrian Tugad, there's this dialectical approach we're having right now where it's about support, collaboration, it's about thoughtful conversations, and I think we just need to hang on to those. That's going to be the leverage for change. And once the screaming stops, I think we will start getting aligned with our values, and I think it will be a positive opportunity to make change where change is needed.
And Isabel, what do you see as the key issues here?
Yeah, I agree with all the comments. Like, the transparency and the accountability is really key. And we're starting to see some of that play out, even at a federal level, with some of the conversations and the publicity around certain events right now. And so that's going to be pretty critical to this culture. I like to use like sports and a culture renovation. That's there's a book that, on culture renovation that I'm just stealing and putting sport into the mix, because, we all talk about these really great experiences that we've had and continue to have, and why we're all here today, everyone, all the participants, because we're passionate about sport and we want to protect it and we want it to be better, or, be good. And that's the piece around, we don't necessarily have to throw everything out. With this, the renovation is we have to rebuild in certain areas. It could be the foundation, it could be, the roof, it could be there, and so I think, some of the main issues I think in sport today, obviously there's a highlight around safe sport and egregious abuse and violence. But on the other piece, I think there's a sense of urgency around racism in sport, and a lot of the isms, sexism, etc. So there's I think that's another key area that needs to stay front and center. Some of the ways that we're trying to address that are through, like we launched an anti-racism and coaching module in May, and even the reaction to it, like just even on social, and it's so interesting to me. And I think part of it is, where people are at in terms of either a high degree of understanding or lack of understanding versus just an acceptance of current issues in society and in sport that that we need to, start by, something like education that you can access, or books, or whatever it is that, help people learn best. And then what I think is important right now is making space for conversation. So really trying to explore further and more in depth into these areas that are so important. So just to give an example of what we're doing this year is, so we launched the anti-racism in coaching, and what we felt would be really important is to bring together a group of coaches that are able to go through that module online, because you're learning on your own and trying to consolidate these new terms or ideas, or experience of others in sport. And what's really important, I think, is for coaches to come together to discuss these important issues and have difficult conversations. Like we had difficult conversations building the module, and they were so rich, and we just learned so much. And we just feel that those opportunities to come together and really have authentic conversations in a safe place, to really become experts over time, in being able to then be able to share with your athletes, or have conversations with your athletes or others. And I think that piece that I said earlier about the empowerment, empowering, people to speak up, like whether you're calling something out or you're calling something in, like, I need to learn, can you please help me? Or that we're not afraid to do that. And I think that is where anybody can, I feel sometimes like it's an organization's problem to fix, or it's not my problem, it's not my organization, it's your organization, or it's the national, or it's the club, or and it's like everybody can take an action to, go read something and implement it, or have a conversation. So it's like I'm saying these things because I feel like right now, like even with COVID, the fact that we've been so isolated and online, that it's so refreshing to be able to come together and talk. Like we figured out how to talk to each other online, or when we get back in person. And it's those connections that we make, and those really powerful conversations is what's going to result in some change. And we can all do it. We can do it on our own, individually or collectively. So
yeah, talk about empowerment. I mean, we really do have so much power to facilitate these conversations, create the forum, create the channel, create the venue, and foster that. So recognizing the importance of giving people an opportunity to call something out or contribute something, an idea or an insight, crucial. Love the metaphors too, of culture, the way that Andy's describing, everybody's describing the cultural fluency, what do we believe is important, what are our priorities, what are our values, but they then take a form, right? A structure, like a clubhouse, or like the field of play, they take on, they become artifacts. So we need to be careful in designing, right? And we need everybody's voices in there. You're also touching on psychological safety, that we need to be safe to be, learn, contribute, and then we're safe to challenge. So conscious of all that. Oh man, we're learning so much. And Dorothy, what are you honing in on? What do you see as the real leverage points, the real issues at stake right now within our sport environment?
Listening to everybody, my brain went pinging in all different directions.
Me too.
And I want to say stuff about all of them, and they're just kind of log jammed in my brain right now. For some of us, and I'm speaking in the Indigenous communities, it's for those of us who've been involved in the Aboriginal coaching modules. We've been kind of saying this for, I think it's 20 years old, 23 years old now. We've been kind of talking in and around this basically for 25 years, I think. So for us, it's like, okay, phew, there's a recognition that you're starting to understand where we're coming from in terms of how we coach and how we work with athletes through the Aboriginal coaching modules. And really it's coaching the whole person. When you coach the whole person, you're helping. That's why I make that point. We're growing human beings. whether we want to acknowledge that or not, it's essentially what we're doing, whether it's at the community level, the youth level, or even up at high performance, right? We don't stop growing and learning as human beings. So as coaches, we're taking on that role, whether we acknowledge it or not. And so we're looking in the holistic model, we're looking at the physical, mental, cultural, and spiritual aspects of our athletes, and then asking the question, how do I make sure in my coaching I'm attending to those athletes' physical, cultural, mental, and spiritual needs in our programming, in our daily interactions with our athletes, and then broaden that to include the organization that I'm working for. How is that working? Are we paying attention to those needs? Because if we're not person-centered, then what are we actually paying attention to, and what really is our goal? Is people just the byproduct of how we get to our goal, or are we trying to build a better community, an individual, then a community, then a nation? So within our cultures, that's what we focus on. So everything that we look at is really around how do we ensure that we're paying attention to all of our individual needs, because that will directly and indirectly lead to a better community, a better family, and a better nation. And I see some of that starting to happen in sport in Canada. So some of us are going, okay, can you hurry it up a little bit? Which you can't, right? It's not, if people are not ready to think in those terms, then they're not ready. And it's like, okay, so we just have to wait 7 generations for them to become ready, right? So we have this term, I'm not working for my immediate benefit. I'm working for the benefit of 7 generations down the road. So it helps us to look at change from a different viewpoint, right? Be a little bit more patient. Yeah, okay, we've seen this before. We've seen this upheaval. Yeah, it's going to happen. And okay, maybe we'll take 2 steps forward and 6 back, and then another 2 forward, and that's okay. We're still making that forward momentum. So for me, I think the big changes are a little bit of shifting outside of those silos, right? There's a lot of different sports in Canada, and they all operate in these funky little silos, right? Which is why I appreciate actually Sport for Life and the work that they're doing with long-term athlete development, because it's pulling people out of those silos a little bit. And so the work that they're doing with the NSOs and helping to create or embed LTAD within their programming, different sports are talking to each other, and they're pairing up with each other and having conversations, and they're showing each other what they're actually doing and developing in their programming. And people are going, hey, that's really cool. How did you do that? Right. So now the different sports are actually talking to each other a lot more than what I saw 25 years ago. Right. There's more openness to sharing information across sports. And I'm seeing people move from different sports into other sports at the admin level, right? Which even helps that process even more, because it's like, there's not just one way to do sport, right? So sometimes when we're stuck in that silo, we think about this is our way of doing things and we have to do it this way. And then somebody comes in and it's like, well, in our sport, we do it this way. And it's that one little trickle of an idea that kind of 10 years down the road, all of a sudden you realize there's been a fundamental shift in our organization because somebody brought in that one idea, which is really cool. And that's what I see starting to happen amongst the organizations. And speaking with some of the NSOs that I've come into contact through Sport for Life, it's like, yeah, we've started shifting how we think this should go, and now opening it up and being more broad and going, okay, well, why don't we try this? And the idea when I first came into sport, it was like, you come in, if you make a mistake, okay, now you have to hurry up and fix it, right? But now it's like, okay, that didn't work. How come it didn't work? What led to it not working? And like you said, Jennifer, we don't have to throw everything out. We just have to shift our ideas a little bit to make it work for our sport, our particular sport, and our parameters within our sport. Because all the different sports, there's such a diverse way of how athletes come into their programming, where they're at from the community level all the way up to the high performance level. It's really diverse. How many athletes they have, what pool do they have to come from, pool to get to the higher performance, and then what is this group doing over here that has had no impact or ideas from this group over here? Can we get them talking together, right? So that change will come because of those conversations that they're having with the sports, right? Because every sport has their own way of organizing and delivering their sports, and things that if I'm coming from soccer or box lacrosse, I don't even think about, but there's something that I can pull, say, from some of the winter sports and how they do their sports year round and where they have to go and the lengths that they have to go to ensure their athletes are trained, that maybe I can pull from to use in my sports and vice versa. And then,
Sorry, Dorothy.
yeah,
I love how you
that's all
highlight
right.
that the LTAD, the LTPD. I like that participant development is so great.
Yeah,
But that ends up being this thread that links up everyone. And we have other threads like that. Obviously, coach development is like that as well. What are some other threads that are kind of building a network across all the sports in Canada, or serve to kind of create that web of connection and understanding? Like what does On the Podium offer? What does the Sport Institutes offer? What does CAC offer, and other organizations across Canada? What do you think? So it's a common thing we're all talking about.
I think the internet is a big piece of that.
Mhm.
I'm talking at the community level, not necessarily the high performance level, but what I'm hearing from a lot of the kids playing in community sports, if they're not getting what they need from their coach, they're going to YouTube, they're going to Instagram, they're going to TikTok, right? To get the information they have to develop if they're not getting it from the coaches. And I think we as a sports system need to really figure those things out. How do we take advantage of things like TikTok and YouTube and I'm not up on I'm too old for all the platforms, but the other platforms that the kids are going to learn their skills, right? So how can we make it more direct for the athletes so they're getting good information, as opposed to some random person just throwing up and, hey, this is what I do. And I'm seeing some of the coaches in the States are doing that with younger athletes, but I don't see anybody in Canada doing that, where they're taking a specific sport and doing sport specific information with them. So I think that's an untapped resource that we could really pull in and use effectively in Canada.
Yeah, because it really speaks to that empowerment, right? We are definitely seeing an empowerment of our athletes, and I think our increasing access to communication platforms, apps, channels is what's definitely breeding that access to information, but also access to people's ears, right? You have a greater voice. Yeah. Okay. What else is working across our system here? Highlighting some of the programs, concepts, initiatives. What else do you see that's actually shifting sport in a really positive way? Tracy?
I think the programs that we are working through through On the Podium in Sports Scientists Canada. So my title is Leadership and Development Lead. One of the main projects I work on is the selection committee chair for the LEAD program, which is a leadership development program. And what is interesting about that is that the groups are curated to come from across discipline areas, across regions of the country, across types of organizations within the Canadian high performance sports system specifically. I think it's a small cohort. They're usually 10 to 12 people at a time. But what seems to be of the most value when you talk to the people in them is the opportunity to talk to other people. Like Dorothy said, right? To break down those silos, to actually like talk to people in different organizations. This is the project that I'm working on. One of the things that Jennifer's the lead of that program, Jen is running the education, that she has involved is that they have to have both a mentee and a mentor. And so in that small crux of a moment, you're getting essentially exposure to 3 different responses to education, to growth, to discussion, to difficult conversations. And that's happening. And the WISP program, which is the Women in Sports Science program, is providing women in particular the opportunity to get some of that exposure as well through mentorship, to leadership opportunities, to leadership challenges, to discussion. So I think those are examples of ways in which it's going well. I founded and launched this year the Canada Games Sport Physiotherapy Leadership Program. And so what that is for Black and Indigenous physios who are interested in sport. The Niagara Canada Games and the Canada Games Council is willing to work with me to have 2 therapists of Black and or Indigenous ancestry get the opportunity to go to the game in a sort of a sponsored medical role. So they're embedded in the game's environment. And not only will they get the field hours, which are what they need if they want to continue with their postgraduate education in sport, but they also get a chance to do an observership with people who are in athlete health leadership positions. So whether it's the medical services coordinator, the lead, the chief therapist, the chief doc, whatever, and get to see what operations looks like and its impact on health. I think those are just a couple examples. And I know this is just the first games. Niagara is the first one we've launched it at, but I've already been approached by other disciplines looking to scale and take that work. And I took a lot of that work from actually, we're sort of fleshing out the memorandum, came from the Aboriginal Coaches Apprenticeship Program. And so using the ideas that they had there and thinking about how that could be responsive in a physio situation, in an athlete health service provider situation, and seeing how I could sort of build that out. So I think there's things happening at different levels and at different points of growth and impact, but those are just a couple examples.
And I want to hear more because I know all of you are working on specific initiatives, and there are some powerful programming ideas emerging. But I want to also highlight, you keep reflecting on the importance of connection, the importance of this kind of web of learning, right, from one another. And we have to keep pulling together because there is a lot of antagonism. There's a lot of blame. I always like to say, how do we solve the problem, not the blame? Starts with understanding, like Dorothy was saying, what is the actual issue that we're trying to fix before we just start throwing solutions at it. Let's understand it better. The importance of
to that point, Jen, is actually, I should say, the role that I'm actually in as leadership and mentorship theme lead is actually that. It's an opportunity for me to sort of get in a different position, a non-clinical position, to be able to sort of see how the organization works in a different way as members of the High Performance Advisory Council. So it's a 2-year term that is exactly that chance for different people to be able to get in different roles and to examine the problems and examine the issues and examine the potential of sport through different lenses than perhaps the ones we were trained in. So I should say that as well.
And that was the other thing I wanted to kind of throw out there, just get you all percolating on, because we'll keep talking about what's working, what are some of the programs that are occurring, because they get a bit lost in the shadows, I think, of the negative discourse that's occurring right now. But also, what are the factors that enable the new perspective? What are the factors that enable attention to the whole person, attention to the whole community? So what are the things that have enabled these kinds of programs to get off the ground, because this is kind of new stuff, right? That we're delving into. So just percolate on that for a minute. I'll come back to it. But I wanted to get you all thinking about that. You know, the structure of the position, you know, and that it's rotating. You're sitting in that position for a couple of years. It gives you the opportunity to have a new perspective. Someone designed that. I'm pointing at Andy, right? That enabled that to then happen. There are other things like that that have been structured into the system that have enabled these things to thrive and grow and develop. What else is working? What else is your organization working on to try to help sport advance? Andy, what else?
Yes, and thank you, Tracy, for highlighting Sports Scientists Canada. It is a collaborative organization, and I think building upon Dorothy's comments about breaking down silos, and I don't think it's new. I think we're just shining a light on this, and I think that's the positivity we need. That's the collaboration, the coexistence we need. And I'm looking at Isabel right now, thinking about things such as the Pursuit program from On the Podium, and how it works with all of its sport partners, including Coaching Association of Canada, obviously. There's so much collaboration. We need to celebrate that, so that the change is directly correlated to the power of the collective voice. And I think that's going to be incredibly important as we move forward. And if there is a silver lining of COVID, is the ability of everybody to come together. I'm so proud of working with the Canadian Olympic Committee, Canadian Paralympic Committee, On the Podium, working with them every day, just trying to get everyone safely to the games, Tokyo or Beijing. It wasn't about going there to win medals. The first conversation was always, let's get people there safely, and then allow them to express themselves if they can, all things considered, to perform. And then let's bring them home safely. That was the entire dialogue. And I think we forget about these stories, and storytelling is incredibly powerful about how we are getting it right. And there's other work that On the Podium is doing in culture, but it's not just us doing it. We're facilitating it with our partners, trying to develop culture and wellness facilitators, working with practitioners such as Tracy with Sports Scientists Canada. So up and down the system, it's all about change, and it's all about managing it with thoughtful programs, thinking it through. And again, it's not just high performance, because I'm looking at Dorothy and her comments with Sport for Life. I remember in 2017, excuse me, 2017 or 18, Richard Way stood up in a conference, Sport for Life conference in Gatineau, and it was incredibly powerful moment where people said the disconnect between On the Podium and Sport for Life on what is a gold medal profile versus what is an athlete skills matrix. And can you please, both of you, talk together? And then for the next 3 to 4 years, it was constant communication about building the LTD 3.0. So there was an integration of our language, integration of our understanding. We still didn't have to adopt my position or your position. It was about coexistence. And again, those are powerful moments that we need to remember. So again, great point from Dorothy again, how the LTPD or AD, there's points of collaboration up and down the system, including the high performance. So thank you.
Great. And I want to give you a chance to speak about some of the other initiatives that you're working on. You've highlighted a couple.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to go back to something Dorothy said as well. And I think part of a way that we can, move forward is like creating some consistency. So Andy just threw out like language, and that system alignment is going to be really, really critical, and our organizations really need to work together to get it right. So those, like the example of Sport for Life, and those collaborations are really critical. And just to create even clarity in what we're trying to say and do, if we're using common terminology or or programming or whatever the case may be. I guess just to highlight a few areas that we've been working on, in addition to our national programming, so our national coaching certification program, what we've really been trying to do over the last, I would say, 5+ years is when we have those opportunities to either access additional funding, to create new programming, is to really create some legacy resources. So go through those pilots, go through those opportunities to connect with coaches. So we had wonderful opportunity to work with, have some funding from Status Women Canada to build out mentorship resources. And so we were able to pilot those with coaches, and it was women coaches, and create these legacy documents. So they're there to be used by the community at large. So it just eliminates people having to access additional resources, take the resources that, it was research-based, it was piloted, it was tested, it was revised, and is now available. So people can have at least a base of, not having to start from scratch on something. So we try to be really intentional in how things that we can pursue will be able to be used by the larger community. We've done the same thing with communities of practice or social learning networks, where they're really powerful and have been used through universities have used them, and with sport programs, and we have as well. And that's an area that we can connect. We actually partnered with On the Podium to do a safe sport community practice a couple of years ago, and those conversations were really powerful. It was really a reflection of what was happening in the daily training environment, and things like, for example, a coach in their reflection of the conversation was like, I'm responsible for team selection, and I have a really good relationship with my athletes, but sometimes I'll joke with them and say something like, if you don't have a good practice, I'm going to cut your funding. But it was like, they're in a really good space, but just being, but then realizing that after the fact that this person they found out relied 100% on funding. And so it actually wasn't really that funny, and was still quite stressful to that individual, even though it did not come from a malicious place. But so through these, these conversations, really exploring what does safe sport mean in my environment, it's, and it's even these daily interactions. So that the language that we speak, the words we say, it's so critical. And again, like I trying to simplify things to a place where it's doable for anyone, right? Like, it's to really be reflecting and be self-aware, and how, someone might react to something that you say. And that's all part, I think, of where we're trying to go with creating these positive environments for, participants and ourselves and coaches and our sport administrators.
Can I say, Isabel, that I like talking about that overlap? One of the things I don't think we've talked about, we kind of been talking about things in these concrete phases, but people are more than one thing at a time, right?
Yeah.
And so with some of these legacy resources that you have, and even with Sport for Life, like that document itself, I've actually gone to and referred back, especially as athletes are coming back and getting more notoriety, they're starting to get invited or thinking about launching their own camps. Think of how many people in our coaching ranks come from our athlete ranks, and our administrator ranks come from our coaching ranks. And so I have gone to the website and used some of the documents and some of those resources to refer back to athletes who are working at the community level as coaches, who are working at the community level as administrators of camps. And some of them are ones that they had to do already, but from the athlete side. Some of them are ones that they didn't realize that we were doing. And using those legacy documents, using those things that are open access to have them start thinking differently about sports, not in the way that they use it all the time, right? They're still athletes sort of first and foremost, but understanding that it's not just their athlete hat that they're sort of responsible for or have the potential to contribute to when they are a camp director or a coach or an administrator of some kind. So I just wanted to highlight that those resources work in both directions, and that I've anyway myself found them to be really interesting ways of both opening athletes' eyes and inspiring different kinds of conversations with them about system and structure in a way that's still sort of relatable and approachable and relevant, because who wants to talk about like theory? So
Thank you. And we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to finish off with this concept of, what are the factors at play that have been supporting productive conversations, productive opportunities to see things differently, that have supported the resourcing of initiatives that actually acknowledge the whole person, the whole community, and the whole of society, really, right? Of all that we're working for. what do you see is really necessary that we have to keep hammering away at, especially within this context of antagonism? Right now, there is the screaming, there's anger, there's hurt, and we do have to, acknowledge that. We can't just kind of push that aside and carry on. But what do you think are the factors that will keep these conversations going, keep our focus where it needs to be? What's helping?
I'll just kick off again and just pick up on Dorothy's comment about the holistic development of the athlete and the person first approach. And again, it is symbiotic with performance, and it is not always a linear, start off with people. I mean, it's dynamic. And I think we haven't spoken about mental health and mental illness and wellness, and there's this interplay with that. And again, another role that On the Podium plays is sponsoring research in this particular space. What's the interplay between mental health, between mental illness, mental performance, certainly in the context of games? I think this is a really important opportunity that we take the time to understand what's happening through applied research. And again, there's a lot that's happening there, but I think it's very, very important that we keep these conversations going and we keep the paradigm at the very forefront, which is a people-centered approach. And we don't shy away from the conversation around performance. It's not a dirty word, and it certainly can be put into the same sentence with people and performance. And I'll go back to what I said earlier. So again, I think I'm encouraged by the environment we are in right now.
Yeah, I agree. And Dorothy, I want to come back to you because you were talking about how you're grateful that people are starting to recognize things you've known for a long time and that you've done for a long time as a coach, right? Focusing in on the whole person, developing the whole person. What enables you to do that? What works?
I'm not sure how to answer that because it's just kind of what I've done always. And then I fell into the Aboriginal coaching modules, which kind of reinforced that idea. Really, I think for me, what's always in front of my brain when I'm working with athletes is they are an individual, and I need to keep reminding myself that they are a human being. And so therefore I have to treat them as a human being and give them the space that will allow them to thrive. How I do that is by getting to know them as an individual. So many of our families are larger. So, right, I'm the oldest of 6 girls, right? At some point, we all said to people, yeah, I'm one of the Nicholson girls. However, I'm Dorothy, and you have to get to know me as Dorothy. As there's attributes for us Nicholsons out there, right? Familial attributes that people apply to us. And it's like, sure, I have those. But I also have some of my own individual attributes as well. And in order for me to thrive, I have to be in a space that allows me to be myself without having to feel like I have to be somebody else to be on part of this team or part of this sport. So it's really, the key thing is getting to know your athletes on an individual level, whether you're with them for, at the community level for the season, or if you're in that high performance environment where you're only with them for 10 days, right? It's really figuring out how to create that space that allows you to get to know each other on an individual level, because then, only until then can you make progress with that athlete, because otherwise you're always butting up against an athlete thinking you're saying something, you think they're saying something, and the miscommunication happens, and then you don't gel as human beings. So that's basically how I've approached working with any of the athletes that come, or even coaches too, because I mean, facilitating, I have to do that. I only have 8 hours with them, so I have to figure out how to create that environment that allows them to be themselves and be open to sharing. themselves with the rest of the group. So
Beautiful. And I'm hearing that echoed systemically as well, you know, getting to know each other, each other's institutions, each other's mandates, each other's missions, and trying to really bring, you know, everyone together. But underlying the whole conversation today, I heard a lot of compassion, you know, really try to understand before we impose or cast judgment. I think we're really in that big messy space. Isabel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, caring about the people you work with and being like having empathy, and those are the areas that build those relationships, build the trust, and then create those psychologically safe environments.
Thank you. Thank you all. We're going to wrap up there. And often I'll see people start having to drop off because their lunch hour's over. And I really appreciate all of those who have stuck with us here and joined in to listen in and post their comments. We have some great shout outs from Jory Jansen, your colleagues, and great to see so many friends in the audience today. Thanks so much to Isabel, Dorothy, Tracy, and Andy for joining us and having a very rich, powerful, insightful conversation. That gives me a lot of hope that we have leaders like you out in the sports system. And I know we're all trying to do our best and work for that positive human and social development that sport really offers. Farewell, and we hope to see everybody in September. I have another episode more on governance in sport and starting to delve into that topic a little bit more.